Something breached our cosmic backyard hours ago, and the world has absolutely no idea it happened. At precisely a critical moment during an otherwise quiet evening, an automated space alert fired inside the silent expanse of the Mojave Desert. While billions of people slept, worked, and scrolled through their phones, a profound shift occurred in the space directly above their heads. The night sky that humanity has studied for thousands of years changed permanently in a single hour, and not one mainstream headline has carried the story. Most people carry a comforting assumption about the space around our planet. They believe our telescopes see everything. They trust that planetary defense networks would catch any genuine threat before it ever became dangerous. They accept the general idea that our cosmic neighborhood is a predictable, well-monitored expanse of empty vacuum. That assumption died quietly, and the data that killed it is sitting right now inside classified research terminals that most of the public will never be allowed to access. Deep space tracking networks did not record a standard comet breaking apart under solar heat. They did not log a random debris field scattering through the void in the chaotic way physics says it should. What they recorded was a deliberate, precisely calculated detachment event originating from an interstellar object designated as 3I Atlas, something separated from that parent body while it was still millions of kilometers away from Earth. And what emerged from its frozen core was not a chaotic plume of sublimating ice, not a random spray of planetary dust. It was a single, cohesive entity moving with extraordinary directional intent aimed specifically at our planet. This was an undeniable disruption of our peaceful atmosphere. That singular fact raises a question that institutional science is currently refusing to state out loud. If this object did not separate from its parent body through natural thermal force, through the ordinary process of solar heating that drives standard cometary activity, then what mechanism actually initiated its departure? What caused something to detach, stabilize, and point itself directly at Earth from millions of kilometers out? The answer begins with the physical dimensions of the object itself, and those dimensions are where the real alarm starts. Advanced deep space sensors confirmed a highly specific structural profile when the detachment was first detected. The tracking arrays at the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in California measured the object at 47 meters in length at the moment it severed its connection with the parent body. It was moving at 340 meters per second, a velocity that should have sent it tumbling blindly into the infinite dark, scattering across space the way any naturally ejected fragment would. Instead, within an 8-hour window of its initial detection, it executed a flawless directional alignment. It did not drift. It did not tumble. It corrected, stabilized, and locked onto a precise trajectory that ended at Earth's doorstep. 3 independent tracking stations on 3 separate continents verified every coordinate. The Goldstone Complex in California confirmed the real-time positional data. The Canberra tracking station in Australia synchronized its orbital readings and arrived at identical numbers. Separate instruments in geographically distant locations operating on independent systems produced the exact same result. The object crossed deep space and entered the gravitational zone near our moon on a path so precise that multiple research teams immediately escalated the situation to an active emergency classification status. The cosmos does not hand out such flawless geometric precision by sheer cosmic coincidence, and the secret teams monitoring this development knew their reality had just changed forever on that exceptionally quiet night. This silent intrusion marks a new epoch. For 4 billion years of documented solar system history, space rocks have followed one reliable rule. They do exactly what gravity and momentum tell them to do. They tumble. They fragment under thermal stress. They scatter outward in chaotic trajectories, shaped by the gravitational fields of whatever massive planetary body they happen to pass closest to. In the entire cataloged record of human astronomical observation, spanning millions of tracked objects across centuries of increasingly sophisticated instruments, not a single naturally formed space fragment has ever executed the flight maneuver this object just completed. The statistical probability of a naturally ejected comet fragment settling into a perfectly balanced planetary orbital plane through random chance alone is, for all practical scientific purposes, 0. Researchers at the theoretical 3i Atlas tracking matrix ran the trajectory calculations repeatedly, desperately looking for a fundamental mathematical error in their own telemetry data. There was no error to be found. The object had achieved a mathematically precise orbital insertion around Earth, the exact kind of path that human aerospace engineers design deliberately and spend months calculating before a spacecraft ever leaves the launching pad. A random chunk of ice and rock had apparently done it in 8 hours from millions of kilometers away without any observable course correction. This absolute impossibility forced the situation into classified emergency briefing territory. Senior analysts across multiple international tracking agencies convened in the frantic hours following confirmation. They were not discussing potential impact probabilities. The object posed absolutely zero collision risk to the surface of our planet. Its orbit was entirely stable. What forced those late-night emergency gatherings was the chilling recognition that the data in front of them had no natural explanation, and that the implications of the alternative explanation were almost too massive to process professionally. The historical record made the situation even harder to dismiss. The parent object, 3i Atlas, had been behaving strangely since the moment it was first detected in the dark outer edges of our solar system. Standard comets are completely predictable. They develop highly visible gas tails as sublimating ice responds to increasing solar radiation. They produce consistent, measurable outgassing signatures that allow astronomers to characterize their chemical composition and future behavior months in advance. Over an 11-month high-priority observation window dedicated specifically to 3i Atlas, scientists logged 16 distinct anomalies, events that defied every standard model in the astronomical classification system. The object exhibited sudden, unexplained shifts in rotational velocity that occurred without any detectable external gravitational influence. It produced electromagnetic emissions radiating from its inner core that repeatedly disrupted nearby satellite tracking equipment across multiple orbital zones. Individual researchers initially dismissed these strange data points as simple instrument errors, which is the rational first response when a single anomaly appears. But 16 separate anomalies across 11 months of dedicated observation is not an instrument error. It is a clear pattern. And patterns have intelligent sources. This worrying pattern snapped into sharp focus when the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter processed a radar return that should not have existed under any circumstances of physics. The returning signal was not faint or scattered the way reflected radar from an irregular, rocky surface behaves. It was incredibly crisp, concentrated, and entirely consistent with a highly dense, engineered metallic structure. When orbital dynamics software traced that clean reflection back through space to its origin point, the coordinates aligned exactly with those of 3i Atlas. The structural alignment was within a fraction of a single degree. In the precise language of aerospace engineering, this was not just a passing piece of cosmic debris. This was a structured, organized anomaly that was intentionally steering itself toward us, leaving the scientific team in a state of absolute disbelief as they began to trace the trajectory back to its original parent body with a deep, growing dread. That deep dread was fully justified because the trajectory from that parent body to the object's current orbital position matches a Hohmann transfer orbit, the specific energy-efficient maneuver that human space agencies use deliberately to move artificial satellites between planetary bodies. The probability of a comet fragment accidentally executing a Hohmann transfer is not small. It is not negligible. It is, by every standard of serious mathematical analysis, a complete joke. And nobody in those emergency briefing rooms was laughing. Over a crucial window of intense monitoring, the tracking matrix detected something that pushed the situation from deeply alarming into an entirely new category of concern. The object executed a major orbital correction. Its orbital period, the time required to complete one full loop around Earth, dropped from 15.1 hours down to exactly 14.3 hours. That massive reduction happened in a mere 65 minutes. To accomplish that specific adjustment from an altitude exceeding 300,000 kilometers above Earth's surface, The object had to change its velocity by 47 meters per second. At that altitude, there is no atmospheric drag. Nothing is slowing or accelerating objects through friction. The moon's gravitational field cannot distort an orbit that dramatically in 65 minutes. Orbital mechanics simply does not work that fast at that distance. The kind of velocity change this object executed in just over an hour requires active propulsion. It requires a mechanism deliberately applying force in a specific direction for a calculated duration. Natural processes at that altitude and that distance do not produce 47 meters per second course corrections in 65-minute windows. This was not physics acting on the object. This was the object acting on its own physics. The response from observational platforms was immediate. The Hubble Space Telescope redirected its Wide Field Camera 3 toward the anomaly's precise coordinates. The initial data streams showed the object rotating once every 4.2 seconds. This was a rapid spin, consistent with a tumbling space fragment that had been subjected to a high-energy separation event. But within 45 minutes of that initial measurement, the spin rate slowed dramatically to once every 6.8 seconds. Something was actively removing angular momentum from a 47-meter structure in real time. The energy calculations that followed produced numbers that stopped the analysis teams cold. Slowing the rotation of a 47-meter object at that rate requires the application of force equivalent to a 2-kiloton detonation of TNT. That is not a small number. That is an enormous expenditure of directed energy. And yet, no fragmentation was detected. No debris field expanded outward from the object. No structural compromise showed up on any sensor array. The energy simply appeared to have been absorbed or redirected internally, leaving the object completely intact and newly stabilized in its corrected orbit. Natural explanations were tested and eliminated one after another by the desperate analysts. Standard cometary outgassing. The process of sublimating gas to create thrust produces velocity changes between 0.5 and 2 meters per second. This object separated from its parent body at 340 meters per second, which is 170 times faster than the upper limit of standard cometary activity. A subsurface explosion could theoretically produce that ejection velocity, but an explosion capable of generating that kind of force would shatter a 47-meter structure into millions of individual fragments drifting apart in all directions. Instead, telescopes observed a single, completely intact entity maintaining total structural coherence throughout every phase of its transit. Every natural scenario they threw at the data failed to hold up under scrutiny, leading to the chilling realization that they were dealing with something engineered, self-stabilizing, and guided by a logic that was not of our world, moving purposefully. That purposeful movement confirmed that the object was behaving like something that knew exactly where it wanted to be. A micrometeorite impact was also considered and dismissed. Random impacts produce chaotic, unpredictable trajectory changes. They do not result in mathematically ideal orbital insertions. The probability argument that had already been established in the initial trajectory analysis now applied to every subsequent maneuver as well. Each additional precisely executed adjustment multiplied the improbability of a natural origin until the combined statistical weight of the evidence made natural explanations functionally impossible to defend. The object was acting with intent. And then it started talking. At a critical juncture in the tracking log, the Goldstone Deep Space Antenna Array intercepted something that transformed the entire investigation in a single moment. The anomaly was no longer merely moving through space with suspicious precision. It was actively transmitting. A highly coherent radio emission breached the receivers. And every researcher monitoring the data feed understood immediately that the comfortable framework of natural explanations had just collapsed completely and permanently. The signal arrived at 2.3 gigahertz. That specific frequency range is not arbitrary. It sits within a band heavily utilized by advanced deep space military communication systems. But the frequency itself was not the primary alarm. What stopped the analysis teams was the power and the structure of the transmission. At a distance of 340,000 kilometers, a natural rocky object produces only faint thermal noise, the electromagnetic equivalent of background static generated by surface temperature variations. This transmission measured nearly 500 times stronger than the background radiation of surrounding space. The bandwidth of the signal was equally impossible to explain naturally. It occupied a mere 1.8 hertz, an ultra-narrow slice of the electromagnetic spectrum that requires absolute electronic control and a stable, engineered transmitting architecture to produce. Natural thermal emissions always spread across broad frequency ranges because surface temperature variations are uneven and chaotic. Producing a signal this narrow requires deliberate hardware. It requires a transmitter. Random space rocks do not carry transmission equipment. Analysts monitoring the signal detected a repeating cycle almost immediately. The transmission would activate for exactly 8 seconds, then fall completely silent for 17 seconds, then activate again. The total cycle, 8 seconds on, 17 seconds off, repeated without variation across hours of observation. Dr. Maria Castellanos at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory documented the absolute temporal precision of the cycling pattern. Dr. Thomas Way from the MIT Haystack Observatory stated formally that these transmission characteristics were entirely inconsistent with any known natural body or naturally occurring electromagnetic phenomenon. 16 minutes after the signal was first confirmed by Goldstone, the James Webb Space Telescope executed an emergency priority override of its standard observation schedule. It locked its near-infrared camera onto the precise coordinates of the anomaly. The imagery it returned removed any remaining scientific ambiguity about what was orbiting Earth. The structure was perfectly cylindrical. It measured 47 meters in length and 12 meters in width. Its surface displayed intricate repeating panel arrangements, distinct structural seams, and sharp variations in surface reflectivity that indicated the integration of multiple different advanced materials across its exterior. The structural layout exhibited a flawless six-fold symmetry, showing an organized, deliberate architecture that was clearly visible at the highest resolution the Webb telescope was capable of capturing, leaving no doubt that this was not a random fragment of rock, but an object designed by an intelligence far beyond our current technological capability to easily explain or replicate. This shocking structural design was confirmed when spectroscopic analysis of the surface materials delivered the final confirmation that researchers had simultaneously been working toward and dreading. The outer skin of the structure contained clear chemical signatures of processed metallic oxides, complex, refined materials that require extremely high temperatures and precisely controlled manufacturing environments to produce. These compounds do not form through natural cosmic processes. They are manufactured. Something built this object, and that something understood material science at a level that placed the construction of this cylinder firmly outside the category of anything human civilization has ever launched into space. Within 45 minutes of the Webb confirmation arriving at research terminals, NASA activated a highly restrictive defensive response protocol. The speed of that institutional reaction was itself significant. The Planetary Defense Coordination Office, the agency specifically designed to monitor and respond to impact threats from space, intervened immediately. But the object it was responding to had a calculated collision probability of exactly 0. Its orbit was entirely stable. It was going to keep circling Earth at 14.3-hour intervals without ever coming closer to the surface. The Planetary Defense Coordination Office was not mobilizing because something was about to hit us. It was mobilizing because of what the object demonstrably was. An internal directive bypassed standard civilian research channels and reached the United States Space Force directly. International tracking agencies across multiple allied nations were placed on an unprecedented high alert status simultaneously. The civilian researchers who had been monitoring the anomaly through standard scientific channels found themselves suddenly operating inside a security structure that was not designed for academic observation. The rapid escalation from scientific curiosity to military-adjacent classification happened faster than anyone in the civilian research community had experienced in their professional careers. The panic, as every senior analyst on the project understood, was not about a physical threat in the conventional sense. The orbit was stable. There was no incoming impact. What generated the institutional response was the accumulated weight of every data point gathered since the object first appeared. the 340 meters per second ejection from a parent body millions of kilometers away, the precise orbital insertion in 8 hours, the 65-minute velocity correction at an altitude where natural forces cannot produce such changes, the spin deceleration requiring 2 kiloton equivalent energy with zero fragmentation, the 500 times background strength narrowband radio transmission cycling on a perfect clock. Every single one of these data points, evaluated independently, was deeply anomalous. Evaluated together, they formed a profile that every major observation platform on Earth had now converged on identifying as a manufactured structure navigating our immediate orbital neighborhood with clear operational intent. 3 possibilities remained after natural explanations had been systematically eliminated. Human science had encountered an entirely unknown cosmic phenomenon that mimics the behavior of engineered technology across every measurable parameter. Global defense networks had catastrophically failed to track a massive domestic spacecraft that no acknowledged space program had launched. Or this object was intentionally deployed from the interstellar void, separated from the parent body of 3I Atlas during its approach, and inserted into Earth orbit as the opening phase of something larger than a single anomaly. None of those 3 possibilities offered any comfort. The first option meant our entire understanding of physics was deeply flawed. The second implied a global conspiracy of staggering proportions. The third, and most terrifying, suggested that we were no longer alone in the cold, dark expanse of deep space, watching us closely.